Thank you very much, Hicham. That was a so inspiring overview of the ambitions of the Jan van Eyck. And as you put it very eloquently, there is this relation to the IPCC that we also explore throughout this 3-day event through the meta or fictional institution, IPACC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Art and Climate Change. But in order to move forward, we really need to get a better grasp of what the IPCC is. And for that, we have the pleasure to be joined by two of its vice chairs that I'll introduce in a moment. Just a brief overview of what the IPCC is. It is indeed a key organization in disseminating greater knowledge concerning man-made climate changes and assessing the science related to climate crisis in order to provide governments with scientific information that is policy relevant but not prescriptive, and that can be instrumental to develop climate protocols. Together with the IPCC Vice Chairs, we have the pleasure to have Nina Peva and Jonathan Lind that will provide more information on the Zoom chat. So please pay attention to the chats as well as the conversation. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Thelma Krug, who was elected Vice Chair of the IPCC in 2015 for the 6th assessment cycle. She is a former researcher at the Earth Observation Coordination at the National Institute for Space Research in Brazil, under the Ministry of Science, Technology, Innovation, and Communication. She holds a PhD on spatial statistics from the University of Sheffield, and for more than 15 years, she represented Brazil in the negotiations at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Her main areas of interest are climate change and the role of deforestation, forest degradation, land use change, and national greenhouse gas inventories. Now I give the word to Inga.
Yeah, thank you, Bruno. So we also have with us today Youba Sokona, who was elected Vice Chair of the IPCC in October 2015, holding a deep technical knowledge, extensive policy experience, and an unreserved personal commitment to African-led development. Sokona is currently the Special Advisor for Sustainable Development at the South Center. He has over 35 years of experience addressing energy, environment, and sustainable development in Africa, as well as a proven track record of organizational leadership and management. For example, as coordinator of the African Climate Policy Center and as Executive Secretary of the Sahara and the Sahel Observatory. So I'll now give the word back to Hicham to start the conversation with the Vice Chairs.
Thank you very much, Inga. Thank you very much, Bruno. So, hi, Thelma. Hi, Youba. So excited to have you here. And it was so wonderful to be talking to you the past week. I mean, I've learned so much. Huh? So, maybe if one of you, maybe Youba, if you would like to start, explain us a little bit of what the IPCC is about, you know, for us, for those that do not know what the IPCC stands for. Maybe Thelma, after that, you can also tap into that. Shall we start this way? Youba, can I give you the word?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Hicham, and thank you for inviting us to this conversation. And then you already set the scene. I do not know what else I can add to the powerful speech you made. IPCC, in short, is a body because, as I indicated, it's not an organization, it's a body, scientific body that assesses the scientific knowledge, scientific, technical, socioeconomic, in between to a cycle, within a cycle of assessment, and then that takes roughly 6 to 7 years, the settled knowledge. And it's made of, you know, thousands of scientists across the world, coming from different disciplines.
Right.
From the physical aspect to humanities to socioeconomic, and then to technical to engineering. And then all of them are working in a voluntary basis and then to carry out the assessment that inform the government and the general public.
Right. Thank you. Thelma, you want to tap into that?
Yes, I think the one point that I always like to say about the IPCC is that I see it such a strong bridge between science and policy making.
Right.
This is to me one of the features of the IPCC that it's seldom you find it. And why do I say that? How do we bridge, science with policymakers? I think it's the own structure, the way the processes that IPCC overgoes through the assessment.
Right.
And giving the governments the opportunities of also to comment on drafts. Yeah. And then suggesting also literature, because as Youba pointed out, we don't do our own research. We just assess the literature worldwide. So we are extremely dependent on what is published. Exactly. So we don't make any science on our own. We try to put all the scientific information together. And in doing so, in the drafts, the governments might highlight one or other piece of information that is not included and that they feel it's relevant. So I think that they don't like me to say that, but they feel like co-responsible for the publication. They say, no, the responsibility is of the authors, and we only help it to make the assessment more robust. Exactly. And trustworthy. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's very interesting, as we also discussed, that the actual IPCC organization, which is in fact a non-organization, is a small organization for that matter. But you are connected to thousands of scientists and you're gathering all this information. This is very interesting that it has this sort of structure. That that is basically goes also beyond peer reviewing, in fact, because everyone can review. You told me. I was interested to know from you, Thelma, maybe, what do you think of this crazy idea of inserting the arts within the IPCC? What can we do with that?
Well, we're chatting here, right? So
that's why we're here.
Yeah, a nice conversation, right?
Yeah.
So I already think that it's inserted into the IPCC work.
Okay.
And I'm gonna give you my vision. Why do I see this?
Yeah.
However, I always think that you can enhance, you can make a difference. But for instance, even the technical support units now in this cycle, they have enhanced. The inclusion of designers, and especially because we have figures, we have pictures. These are, in my view, artistic pieces as well.
Okay.
Because it's trying to convey in a picture, there's so many elements that convey the scientific messages of the authors, right?
Right.
It is very difficult. Mm-hmm. I think that art is an art. Mm-hmm. Because it is very difficult. And when I'm saying that, I'm not only saying my understanding of art, maybe it's not only the visual artistic appeal that you have in a figure that expresses so much of these pieces of the science, but I also see art in communication.
Right.
Communication.
Yeah. So this deals with, let's say, a part of our art and art practice, the visualization, maybe of statistics, information, aesthetics, these kind of things. Youba, would you mind, maybe, are there other ideas, as I said also in my speech, that if it's culture in which we view the world, with which we view the world, and if it's about our senses, what could we through that also add to what you're doing, which is basically scientific assessment?
I think that it's fundamentally crucial that artists took part to the overall conversation, because the scientific findings of IPCC need to reach out the wider public, the wider audience, universally. And some people may not be able to read, to write, but they can read art. Because art is universal. It's embedded in culture and a different way, on various way of communicating, of capturing information. The information transmitted through the IPCC report can be translated by different artists.
Exactly.
And then by the way they can translate that, this is fundamental and crucial in order, and then for three critical elements if you want to solve the climate issues.
Right.
Education, information, awareness raising.
Right, right. Would you think that next to the scientific assessment is really based on scientific knowledge, on an instrument, on the instrumentarium of the scientific knowledge? Would you think that the arts, which is working with subjectivity, which is working with speculation, which is working with imagining futures, would you think that we could add that next to the assessments that you have? Could we speculate on futures? Could we, instead of main statistics, add different kinds of futures to the table? Or are we then... Yeah, please go ahead.
More and more we discuss, because IPCC is largely based on peer-reviewed literature. And then we know that all type or various knowledge across the world, it is not all captured in peer-reviewed literature. For instance, the indigenous knowledge, the traditional knowledge, the local knowledge, there are certain ways of expressing them. We need to capture them.
Exactly.
And then we had within the IPCC some conversation of those who are depository of those different knowledge, how to capture, because it's a kind of knowledge better understanding. And then more importantly, I think that the assessment is meant to inform decisions at various levels.
Right.
Because as a citizen of this planet, as a citizen, as a government of this country, as a local government, and then we need to take decisions, and decisions need to be informed by science. And this is why art is crucial, fundamental, and then to be part of the process.
Right, thank you. Thelma, would you want to elaborate a little on this?
Yes. No, I think that this is really an important issue. And when we are talking about futures, the artists can make this appeal visually or in communication. That the future is not a single future.
Right.
There are several futures that is there. So one of the pictures that I like most, the artistic vision that the world that we have today, and depending on what we do from now onwards, we are gonna be leading to completely different world out there. So I know that we will be discussing future, and this is really interesting. This is an important thing, that artists can do this, because when you are talking about science, it's not everybody that can read science. Scientific language is very complex. And we are trying to do our best to really put some art into our communication as well. And I make the best example we had were the 3 messages from the 1.5 global warming report that, was like every year counts, every warming counts, and every action counts. Those 3 messages so strong, summarizing a report with so much scientific knowledge into it, right? And so I do think, as Youba has mentioned, it is absolutely important that we are linked to all forms of communication, and art is a very strong form of communication.
Right.
Be it visually, be it verbal.
Right. Thank you. Maybe we open it up also for questions from the public.
Yes. I would like to tell everyone on Zoom that they can write their questions on the Q&A parts, whereas people following on YouTube or Vimeo can write on the chat, and Inge and I will read them. Maybe to give a little bit more time for fermentation of ideas, I'd like to propose, Dr. Thelma and Dr. Youba, the exercise in long-term thinking that we'll propose the speakers tomorrow. So our conversation will be structured in something inspired by the future design movements in Japan, where they are the group of participants is divided in two groups, actually, one enacting the present and another one enacting the future. I wanted to test out with both of you. Just imagine that you travel to the future 140 years from now, roughly 7 generations ahead. Dr. Thelma, you are in the state of São Paulo. You stay in the same place. Dr. Youba, you're in Bamako, Mali, same place. And then your age is also the same. So those are the frameworks that you're playing with. And I want to know what you see around you and how do you see the role of the IPCC in that world? I know it's difficult, but we can speculate together. We can play around together if you like.
You want to go first?
I go lady first.
Lady first. Okay. So Bruno, okay. So let me envision that. I am an optimistic. Okay. So the IPCC indicates that it's still possible, or it says it is not impossible to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, okay? So let's suppose that. So I am optimistic. It's difficult, absolutely difficult. It is doable. I have to trust it's doable, but we need to have actions now. And the IPCC, with all the knowledge that it assesses, provides the several options that countries can embark, to really decarbonize. It's different from different parts of the world, how they can contribute. So, but anyway, so what I am really wanting to see is a world where all the scientific knowledge that IPCC puts forward in 5,000 pages at every assessment touches the heart of the governments and those that, have the possibility to act.
Exactly.
And it's not only governments. I'm really broadening this up, even ourselves, to do our own part, our own contribution, so that my world in the future, Bruno, it's a beautiful world, okay? So,
I love that.
Yes, it's a sustainable world. It's a world where the inequalities have been disappeared, where poverty disappeared. So this is what we are looking for from the Paris Agreement, right? So why can't I believe that humanity wants to preserve itself for the future? And in 7 generations' time, my family, my grandchildren, great-grandchildren can enjoy life in a completely different world.
Yeah.
I think that the question you raise can be reformulated in a much more concrete manner. Is how you reconcile or address at the same time the imperatives of the immediacy and the very long term. And this is, in the essence, the problem you indicated. In that context, we have at least a minimum of 2 instruments, and then we need to bring them together. One is the climate issue, and then the second is how we make development more sustainable, the sustainability, bringing those 2 different elements. And then we do have a bunch of knowledge in scientific terms, on technical terms. We have the various different elements. And then this is how art will become fundamental and crucial. And then how we communicate that to the people at various levels in various socio-cultural contexts, using different, the different artistic manner, because artists are imaginative minds, creative minds, and then they can do that. This one element, how we change also our behavior, because our behavior has been changed. One good lessons, at least we learn from the COVID pandemic, is that it's possible to change in a very set of time our behaviors. I used to travel a minimum of 3 times a month. To fly a minimum. For the past year, I only traveled once.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, yeah, and then that means we can change our behavior. And then this is fundamental. Ultimately, addressing the immediate need of the people at the same time, investing in the very long term. And then this is the equation we just lay out with those 2 different goals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that,
1 second, Bruno. I felt a little bit of a hesitation in the voice of Thelma when she's very optimistic. I'm very optimistic myself, really. But I felt a little bit of hesitation when you were talking about the 1.5 degrees. Can you tell me, please elaborate a bit? Because I'm worried. I'm worried. Yeah.
No, indeed, we say it's possible. However, there are other very important messages in the IPCC report, which says we need to be it needs to be quick implementation. We cannot delay. It has to be worldwide, so it has to be comprehensive, all sectors. So it's a huge, unprecedented, I would say, change, transformation, transition, if we may. In all sectors. So when I say I'm a little bit hesitant because we are not seeing, and I would say that COVID possibly in some way prevented also the implementation of some actions, mitigation and adaptation actions, but on the other hand, it's refrained a little bit some of the emissions, but we don't know for how long. It could be a learning point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No. Maybe you can give us a little sneak preview of the next assessment. Is that the 6th assessment? How worried should we be? I mean, somewhere I felt we're on a trajectory of 2.7 right now. One of the pathways. Like that. That's a moderate pathway.
You are looking.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, go. I did.
Youba.
You are looking at the business as usual scenario.
That's 2.7, right?
The fact that many things have changed.
Right.
And then, if you look at the discussion, the climate discussion was among scientists and policymakers. And actually, we have seen during the past 2 or 3 years, emergence of the movement by the youth in the climate discussion. That means it's outside now the policymakers and the scientists and the public start drafting on the issue. And this is where what you intend to create is fundamental and crucial, and then to widen, and then the different actors. Because we have seen also people changing their behavior in terms of, the consumption, in terms of they look at what they are buying, what they are consuming, what they are producing. Right. All are very important. And then one of the fastest vehicles in order to communicate that is through art in the different ways and perspectives.
Exactly.
And I also think that from that regard, we have to be optimistic. And then if we all come together in complementing each other, IPCC and the artists and the government and the other people.
Right. Thank you. I'll give it back to you.
We have some questions on our chats. We have one from Katia Garcia Anton, the curator. I would like to know concretely how is the IPCC catching up with indigenous knowledges when it comes to the environment, nature, climate urgency. To do this requires acknowledging indigenous epistemologies and moving out of Western epistemologies so a real conversation can occur.
So we had some experience on that in the IPCC. It started with the 4th assessment report. And as we have to follow certain protocol of IPCC based on existing literature, because there is traceability of the information. And then in order to get around, we co-organize with United Nations University and traditional knowledge community 2 sets of workshops, one in Mexico, and then on adaptation, and one in Australia on mitigation. I participated in the 2. And then it's the people, the indigenous people, the local people, those who are not coming from the universities and others. And then for 1 week, we sat together and then to discuss different elements, and we captured that informed the IPCC 4th assessment report. And then we did the similar thing in the 5th assessment report, and actually, as indigenous community are related to UNESCO, and then we are currently discussing with the UNESCO, and then how to continue that conversation in order for them to be part of the process. And then they also are part of the review process of IPCC report. Thelma, I don't know if you can complement.
No, I think you said it all, Youba, the main points. But we can see that from assessment to assessment, we see the issue of the indigenous people's knowledge, local knowledge, becoming more and more stressed. The impediment is still, as Youba says, most of the knowledge is not written. The knowledge exists. It's really, impressive. But because we do the assessment of the literature, this is a little bit, we are trying to see means by which we can still convey that, but it's still maintaining the principles of the IPCC and the mandate of the IPCC.
Thank you very much. We have many other questions. I can read one more. Inga, please feel free to jump in at any point with the questions from YouTube and Vimeo. We have one more from Charles Zesche. Why has it been so difficult to shift away from the carbon economy? Is it only the self-interest and power of the carbon producers, or are there other reasons? I compare the situation today with the action on CFC's reduction in the 1980s, which was much swifter and less politicized.
This is obviously a question for the government, because IPCC has a specific mandate to provide scientific information on all those different elements, and then to government to take decisions. They said, we are policy relevant, we are not policy prescriptive.
If I may just compliment Bruno.
Sure.
This is really the link between the science and the policy, right? So in some sense, sometimes the authors feel a little bit frustrated because there is so much science, there is so much knowledge, right? And then when it comes to the actions is not on us. What we do is to provide the knowledge, to provide the possible options for countries with cost and everything, regionally, just to take the specificities of each region. But then when it comes to the implementation, it's another Sierra. I think that IPCC has been absolutely instrumental to help, for instance, the negotiations in the Climate Change Convention. For instance, it didn't come out of the blue, much less than the 2 degrees Celsius that the Paris Agreement is striving to get into the 1.5. It didn't come out of the blue. Indeed, the science was already making the difference of the impacts that you could have, from one level of temperature and another. And the consequences of even 2 degrees Celsius to different parts of the world being absolutely differently affected. And so that's the point. IPCC does not have the power to push anyone. And so that's really a little bit frustrating for the scientists who put so much effort to say the situation we are now, the urgency we are now, and we don't see a reflection of the actions that would be related to that urgency. Yeah.
Thank you very much. More questions? I can continue. Inga, do you want to add some from the chat?
Maybe, I just wanted to ask one question on this kind of this polyphony of voices and those kind of very many positions that you obviously have. from all the parts of the world, from the scientists and from the, let's say, indigenous knowledge that you were also describing how you work with it, and really how to work with this counter perspectives then, because I imagine like that is a very big challenge. And I guess like adding art would add to this ambivalence even much more in a maybe very productive way, but I'm wondering how you're thinking about that.
You will wanna go?
Sorry?
Youba?
No, this is not the first time. You know that we work with your community, because the late Maria Rebecca Balestra used to organize every year a festival for Earth with focus on sustainable vision in art and science. And then we used to take part to the conversation they are having on that in order to convey, and then through some of the artistic representation and the message of the IPCC. And then the problem is that it's a complementarity, because we need to convey the message of IPCC. We need that the people capture the message of IPCC. And you could be one of the fundamental drivers of conveying that message, so that not make at all things much more complicated. Because the communication, the language of art can be captured by the common people easily, depending on the culture, depending on the way on then this you communicate that.
Yeah, and Inga, if I may compliment maybe, when IPCC is initiating a new report, the assessment report, which is really big, lasts for 5-6 years, and the special reports, which are 2.5 years. But we try to really balance between the participation of authors from all over the regions. So we have 6 regions. So to balance that, so that you could have exactly that balance of perspectives, and obviously bringing people from each region, they know where the literature is. They know, and also, just to complement maybe the question before on the engagement of indigenous people, even engaging some of the authors, indigenous people, so that they can somehow seek to find also the literature that we could assess. Also, it is interesting to see the perspective of gender balance, how different it is. You can see here, you and I are complementary in some ways. And this is the richness of bringing the gender balance into the authors that prepare the reports from the IPCC. Not only for that, but also for art. It's like you have in different perspectives on the art, because as I was mentioning, science, maybe it's not accessible to all. Art is, but art is not, how can I put this? I think that some types of art, depending on how it's conveyed, it doesn't reach all the regions. It doesn't reach the vulnerable people that are out there and that they do not see represented in that artistic reflection, right? So it's really interesting to see that as Youba and I have been talking, art is being made for people and by people, not necessarily by governments. So art is the reflection of feelings that are shared by so many different cultures and so many different realities. People coming from a completely different development level, wealth, social and economic levels, wealth, and so on. So art is really a possibility to reflect all that in a way that touches the heart of every single, person. That's an art.
The questions keep stacking up here, so we'll try to do some more. There is one from Paulina Feodorov, one of our speakers in the Group of the Future tomorrow. And she asks, could Dr. Sokona and Dr. Krug tell us more about the 7-year cycle of producing knowledge, in what part of that cycle we are now, and even that the upcoming new findings are not public yet. Could you tell us in general terms where we are now and in terms of climate change, and what is the upcoming role of still existing forests in the imperatives to come? Was that clear?
Yes,
it's clear.
I want to go.
No, go.
Okay, so let's go. So we started in 1988. So we are now in the sixth cycle. Every cycle is 6-7 years. Okay, so science has evolved enormously in this period. But one interesting thing is that every single result of the IPCC is followed by a calibration language. It's evidence-based, but it has a calibration language, which I particularly love a lot, because it gives to everyone that reads those results as giving the strength of that result in terms of agreement among the different pieces of literature. We don't only look at the assessment for the, 90 agreed and 10 disagreed. It's not like that. You do an overall assessment. And then you can put the strength of that in terms of all the literature that you assessed. So you say there is a high agreement, low agreement, so that the governments can pick that up and see how mature is that piece of knowledge, right? So even if we do a very simple example, when IPCC started in the first assessment report, it was not very clear that what we are seeing in terms of observations, I would say, something different happening. The scientists were seeing that, but they could not attribute that to humans. Today we do. Today we do. So it's very clear the human contribution to climate change. And this is the very specific point. So the 1.5 global warming report that say that humans have contributed with their actions or activities to something around 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels, right? It seems to be very low. But mind you, this is not equally distributed around the world. So in some parts of the planet, you can have, like in the Arctic, in some seasons, you can have 3 times more than the average global temperature. And this is why you see so many things happening there of concern, right? So every single assessment, the knowledge gets stronger. Normally, you just build up on the language, calibration language that I said. You go from little agreement to, medium to high, and so on. And but most of the time, what you see is just a confirmation, but with a much stronger language in terms of confidence on the results. Now, so every 7 years you have an assessment cycle, if the governments so wish. Because as an intergovernmental panel, we are driven by the expectations that governments have. So it's pushed by governments, right? So I think, Youba, you want to complement?
Yes, just to complement that, because the cycle is not only do the assessment of the main report of the field working group. We had special report. In this cycle, we already published 3 special reports. The special report on global warming of 1.5, the special report on climate and ocean, the special report on climate and land. And then the key conclusion, just in a small word, on the 1.5, as Thelma indicated, we need a fundamental transformation on all aspects of the society. And then it indicated that any fraction of warming matters. And any time, any year matters, and any action matters. That means there is nothing small. And then the ocean, it clearly indicated that the ocean are taking a large part of the heat, and then we are generating. And then the land report indicated also land can do part of the deal with the issue, but not all. Those are some preliminary. And IPCC also stimulate, as we said that IPCC is not conducting research. It's not producing new knowledge, it's assessing. But IPCC stimulates also the production of knowledge. When we started the assessment back to 90s, early 90s, and then we used to have something like some indicated a bit less than 10,000 literature on various aspects of climate for assessing. Actually, some indicate there is 300,000. Some said 500,000 production of the on the climate change aspect. And then two, when we initiated, we had been asked to do the report on 1.5, and we were a bit worried. We said, oh my God, maybe we'll not be able to have enough literature to review. And then we had 6,000 production in a very short term of time, and then to assess, so that IPCC is assessing the status of the knowledge, at the same time is stimulating also the production of knowledge, because in each of the assessments, we indicate the gap in knowledge. And that's very important. And then we indicate also what we don't know, what we know at the global level as well as at the regional level.
Bruno, may I go to the question before I think we didn't respond to the question. If I understood it correctly, it also included the forests in the future, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a very specific issue that I particularly love to address. Obviously, if we consider forests, they have an enormous mitigation potential, which is not the same in the all regions of the world. You know, they can do better in a place and less better, or sometimes they don't contribute. If we talk about reforestation, for instance, it's not suitable in all parts of the world. But anyway, being now that optimistic person that I am, I'm gonna see in the future lots of forests, much more than we have now. It's gonna be a green world, air quality, really good. If I am to be a little bit realistic on what is happening now, and considering that climate change is gonna enhance extreme events. And we are seeing this. We are seeing lots of fires, not that these are triggered mainly or exclusively by climate change. We have to include the natural variability, the proportion also of the climate change, and other human forces interfering in that. So, but if we look at what we are seeing now, huge floods that now in Brazil, even in the north part of Brazil, we never had that. State of Acre now is flooded completely. And then if you look at the fires last year in Brazil was something that was absolutely an outlier. Obviously, there are fires every single year, but climate change is being associated with extreme events that are going to be more frequent, more intense, and lasting more time. So if I look from that perspective, I don't see too much forest in the future. And not because of deforestation. I mean, it's because of the natural events that we might see impacting forests and ecosystems, not only forests, but ecosystems as a whole.
Just one asked the question if there is any repository of the information on IPCC. IPCC is the most transparent organization I have ever seen. Everything is on the website. Nothing is hidden. And then all the comments we receive, all the response of the comment, the list of the authors, and then everything is on the website of IPCC.
Thank you so much. One more question from Johan Otten. What is the role of fiction in the actual construction of a climate equal and just future?
I think that this can come to two different aspects. One is upstream thinking of the IPCC assessment, because as we said, we are not producing we are not conducting any research, but it could be part of the research that has been conducted and captured by the IPCC. And then we also integrated, if you look at the authorship of IPCC, more recently we have philosophers that be part of the authors. We have ethics specialists, behavioral science specialists, and then why not the fictionists as part of the IPCC in order to look at, the very direction, and this is very important element. Second important element, that is the downstream activities after the report is completed. And then this is how the imagination can come in. And this is why I said that the artists, as their creative minds, and then they can project themselves in a far, far longer term. And then they could also look at, and then to have a kind of backcasting on the thing in the longer term they imagine. So that I see the possibility of the upstream activities and the downstream activities. Thelma, I don't know if you have any.
No, I was going to just say that what in the past could be seen as fiction today is reality already, so we don't have to go that far. For instance, if we take the corals, would we ever imagine that we would be having such a depletion of the corals as we have today? And leading to a little bit more temperature rise, like the 2 degrees, it could be leading to the extinction of some species. So that's not fiction. We are talking about, just a half degree, more than 1.5, and this leading to really a very different scenario for the unique species, for the threatened species that are out there, including the Arctic. So the permafrost, we don't know. That's the most uncertain, that we have is what is going to happen with the permafrost. So this is. We always thought about fiction, Bruno, as something really far away from us, right? So you're futuristic. You're looking, something that, you would say, well, this is never going to happen. And then all of a sudden, I think that we get to see some of these things that we thought would be futuristic, coming very quickly. And this is the difference when we're talking about climate change. The speed in which the changes are happening. And this is the contrast to what, people said, oh yeah, but these things happen in the past. But it's the speed to which we see the changes. So to me, fiction might not be that futuristic vision, but it must be much closer to us than we could possibly anticipate.
Goes back to the opening keynote of Hicham, where he mentioned exactly that we're living in a fictional world, so what is the role of fiction anymore? Plenty of questions still. Please interrupt me if you want to ask Hicham.
Yeah, and I think also Inga wants to ask a question, but I can't help but to think you both are beautiful people. I mean, how can you remain so optimistic? If you read these reports, and you said it already that we might lose all forests, that is huge.
No, because we have to be optimistic. If you were not part of the conversation, the fact that we had that conversation, that means, we reach out a wider audience, a wider public.
Sure.
Because many of you, your community and other communities think that what we are doing, what we are dealing with is a bit distant. And then now we realize that it's closely embedded of what we are doing, and then you could be a much more wider and faster vehicle for that.
Exactly. Inga, I'll give it to you.
So sorry, I just have like two maybe more general questions or comments that I hear from the responses of audience in Vimeo and YouTube, and a little bit also in the Zoom chat. So as we have, I guess, primarily the arts audience, participants have been thinking about like how, and that we should actually be aware of that, how to have this perspective of the arts as a contributor to a different kind of knowledge, instead of just like, let's say, illustrator of processes, and how to have this like thinking out of the box kind of approach of the arts and with the arts, and also with this kind of imaginary collaboration. And I think that is something that we will try to work on in the next few days, to kind of go beyond just this visualization. But of course, if someone, you know, like Hicham or one of the vice chairs would like to comment, that's also really amazing. And another more concrete question, which also appeared, was like, if we are going to use art as the medium to convey certain kind of, you know, this impact of climate change to the public, like what kind of platform do we see that would be relevant to make this message accessible to the public, which also could really, I guess, well relate to Hicham as well as the vice chairs.
Thank you. Thelma, Youba, you want to start first?
I think that you have different ways and different platforms of conveying. I can take just a couple of them. Painting is a one way of photographs are the one way of. Scarification are the one way of. I remember when I was a kid, in order for them to recognize where you came from, which family you belong, it's related to where they cut your hair. If you say the certain way of cutting hair, you identify immediately that person. There is different ways of conveying the message. And then on the way you dress, there is different artistic way, and then singing, and then the music, and also there is different way. You have much more wider ways as artists to communicate the language people understand, because it's embedded in the culture. That's very important. And then so that you cannot imagine, me personally, if I were an artist or I were part of your community, I would be happy and then to take on board some of the key elements of the IPCC funding and to convey it to people.
Yeah, thank you. Thelma?
Yeah, Khalidi, I just want to go back a little bit on your first comment on the forests being decimated, you know. I wanted to single out that we, obviously we divide two things. One are observations. So we have observations, right? So we can see how we can see the trends, blah, blah, blah. And then obviously you can project the future. And you can project the future under different scenarios. So it's just an imagination
Exactly.
of how the world will develop.
Exactly.
Maybe none of those scenarios will be exactly as we foresee.
Exactly.
So in one scenario, you may have, as I mentioned, you know, big forests everywhere. And then in another scenario, which is the other extreme, I would say, then you can have really, you know, a very dim contribution from forests, and that's going to be really regrettable. Now, when we talk about, you know, art and climate change, possibly comes to everybody's mind the polar bear. I cannot think of any other image that have been as strong as the poor polar bear and that mass of ice just trying to, you know, to be there. And we become so despaired to see that image, right? Yeah. It's the reflection of what we don't ever want to see, right? And so this is the power of art. It is bringing a reality that's not in our everyday. We don't have polar bears in Brazil, but everybody was sensibilized by the polar bear. Sure. Right?
Not in Mali.
Not in Mali.
They have other concerns.
But that comes back to that discussion we had, that art has to be representative of the peoples and of the realities of the peoples, right?
Exactly.
So most likely the polar bear image is now too much explored, so the impact is not that big. But I am absolutely sure that art has an enormous contribution to the emotions. It touches the emotions more than words in the scientific, reports.
Yeah. Yeah,
It is.
exactly. I think also, if I may add to that, Thelma, thank you. Also for the image of the polar bear. Now it's back in my mind. No, I mean, this has been a contested image. Last year we did the Earthsea Intensive about communications of climate change. And it was really interesting to see these many different points of views. It is also, in fact, the idea that we have, or that I have, at least, is to project towards and to align ourselves with you, the IPCC. That's already the first start, is to say we need to halve our emissions by 2030 if we adhere to the 1.5 scenario, right? 2030 is like a horizon. It's like a marker in the future from which we can work backwards. What kind of world would we want to live in? What kind of world can we envision to live in? So that's already a speculative and an imaginative way of looking at this situation. So that's basically the way we were thinking. At the same time, it pushes us, if you work in scenarios, it pushes us to really rethink the way we work, really rethink our systems, our own systems. In fact, we are also looking at ourselves. We are mirroring, in fact, our behavior, our capabilities. What do we need to do to change? So I think this is, as Youba also said, it's about behavioral change, something we also something we also did in our environmental identities program, to look at environmental psychology, which is also part of the assessment, I know. That's why we were thinking, and I thought we were getting on the right track, actually, if we could put in these speculative models, these scenarios, these instead of visualizations, because, you know, that is, we feel a bit instrumentalized, you know, when we talk about visualizations and things like that. But we can do so much more. But these are things that you've also said. So in that sense, we are on the right track, I think. This is getting really good. So I'll give it back to Bruno maybe for one or two questions, and then I would like to thank you before we leave, because
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Unfortunately, our time has run over. So the conversation has been amazing, and we have many questions and comments on the chats that we will definitely pick up on the upcoming 2 days. But our time has run out. So I'd like to thank Dr. Thelma Krug and Dr. Youba Sokona for their amazing inputs, and also Jonathan Lin and Nina Pevo for the information on the chat. Do you want to think?
Yeah.
If I may, just one suggestion.
Yes, please, Youba.
Because I see that you said Intergovernmental Panel on Art and Climate.
Exactly.
And Thelma and myself, we discussed it. And then we are suggesting people panel on art and climate.
Okay.
And that is
great.
That is inclusive.
Exactly.
That is open. That is universal. It
Exactly.
is not only for people, for the government, because you lock in, and then that makes much more sense. And that will have a good impact. And then you can be part of the IPCC process to have an observation status.
That's a wonderful suggestion. That's a really good suggestion. Perhaps we can also add the questions that are now in the chat. Perhaps we find one or the other way to answer them or have them answered. Let's see if there's a possibility there. I want to thank you both, Thelma and Youba, for this wonderful discussion that we had. And it's absolutely, as I said before, it's a dream for us. Where we started in 2018 thinking of this alignment to the IPCC, and here you are. And here you are with this kind of presence and this optimism and this, you know, this energy also for the future. That's really inspiring, and that gives us hope. So I'm pleased also to be with you together in this, and that we can also continue this process.